Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for your encouragement in pushing me to do this today. And a couple of things. I've survived Meet the Press, but I think you're a different audience altogether. So please be gentle. But I also would like to acknowledge my brother has joined us this afternoon, Group Captain Grant Pinder, who has served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but at the end of the day, he's just my brother. So thank you for being here. The Coalition has installed entrepreneurship and innovation as the key elements of its approach to governing Australia, including the provision of national security. In a recent speech by the Prime Minister to the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, DC, Malcolm Turnbull promoted the virtues of continual change and constructive disruption, and the importance of tackling entrenched problems through creative pragmatism. Building on this theme, when releasing the 2016 Defence White Paper in February in the Adams Auditorium, the PM described the document as truly visionary in its embrace of innovation and its engagement with the private sector in shaping Australia's global outlook. While the White Paper identifies investment, science, technology, governance and economic capacity building as important factors for stabilising Australia's regional environment, the document provides little detail on the latter beyond stating broad principles. This presentation focuses on entrepreneurship and its relationship to security. I will argue that entrepreneurship is a widely researched concept whose practice is frequently reported. The place and significance of entrepreneurship in the construction of an enduring peace is not. In the short time available, I will attempt to do three things. First, outline a potentially disruptive view of economic capacity building that will include the role of entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurs in tackling poverty within post-conflict states. Second, I will contend that securing the necessary institutions and infrastructure for business development and economic growth requires a minimum decade-long engagement. And third, I will propose a new training role for Defence in building Indigenous business expertise, particularly among women entrepreneurs, using East Timor, Bougainville and Afghanistan as case studies and as pointers to what might be possible elsewhere. The ravages of armed conflict include economic disruption and perhaps even depression as financial systems are debilitated and business confidence is destroyed. Every country that has been blighted by violence is in need of the entrepreneur. There are many views on entrepreneurship. Some converge and some diverge. I like the approach of Wennekes and Thurrock, who identify 13 distinct roles for the entrepreneur with a particular focus on external circumstances rather than personal attributes. Entrepreneurship essentially involves risk-taking, innovation, arbitrage and coordination of production factors in the creation of a new business. Ever since the famed Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter put the entrepreneur at the centre of social progress, scholars have highlighted the transformational role that entrepreneurship plays in generating economic and social wealth and undergirding peaceful coexistence through commerce. Entrepreneurship is integral to innovation, competition, employment growth and poverty reduction. Shane and Venkat Traman define entrepreneurship as a process in which opportunities to create future goods and services are discovered, evaluated and exploited. Others would claim the creation of new enterprises lies at the heart of entrepreneurship. More broadly, entrepreneurship comprises self-employment and independent business ownership. Plainly, the discussion continues, but core principles are clearly emerging. While there is no single definition, commentators agree that there are certainly circumstances in which the entrepreneur is at the fore of human progress, particularly when societies are being rebuilt after armed conflict. In fact, a number of scholars are now asserting that entrepreneurship is the most sustainable route to economic recovery, political stability, and ultimately communal peace. The most recent literature emphasises the importance of local entrepreneurs as key stakeholders in post-conflict societies. With private entrepreneurs, rather than state instrumentalities, embodying an alternative model of change in reconstruction and development work. It is a bottom-up model for rebuilding and reconstructing areas devastated by violence. Although the evidence points to entrepreneurship as a potential source of creativity, change and transformation in the conduct of peace operations, entrepreneurship remains a largely unexplored area of research among security analysts. Equally, the essence of social entrepreneurship, which is a particular expression of entrepreneurship, remains a contested concept. For some, social entrepreneurship is restricted to not-for-profit, non-government organisations seeking funding opportunities through collaborative business activity, while others view it as the exploitation of social innovations to solve social problems to bring about social change. But there is a common element in most accounts of social entrepreneurship. That element is disruption and adaptation. Notably, convention and tradition are dispensable. By way of example, microfinance is an innovative alternative to traditional financing for entrepreneurs in impoverished countries, with the global microfinance market expected to grow at 19% annually for the next 5 years to nearly $14 billion in 2019, providing much needed entrepreneurial capital along the way. I will discuss microfinance and warm glow theory further in my chapter for the conference book. In sum, entrepreneurship is a source of radical innovation as opposed to incremental change, and it is more effective in prompting change than outside pressure. Research shows that more effective is change from inside the country and its economic system than from the outside and the imposition of rigid regulatory regimes. Entrepreneurship through the creation of new business also works to prevent poverty, which is one of the root causes of armed conflict. With current recovery strategies such as peace building providing only temporary relief from the effects of war, new thinking is needed to address the systemic challenges of economic reconstruction and sustaining long-term economic growth. The necessity of new thinking presents a unique opportunity for government, universities, NGOs and the private sector to not only better understand the potential of market-based methods to resolve entrenched social problems, but also to examine the potential of entrepreneurship as a solution to cultural disadvantage and social alienation. In the past, Western governments in particular have been reluctant to assist entrepreneurs who stand to gain personally from supported enterprises. International relations specialists, constrained by perhaps an inadequate knowledge of economics, have also ignored the possibilities of entrepreneurship. Conversely, those with expertise in development economics have not attended closely to the dynamics of national security. My point is simply this: the nature of the conflict will impact post-conflict recovery and the preservation of peace, hence the need for multidisciplinary dialogue. I would contend that rebuilding a country's economic base should be the first priority post-conflict, with entrepreneurship having the potential to drive economic development and absorb the energies of former combatants, especially in an intra-state conflict. But a note of caution: entrepreneurship can be channelled into productive, unproductive, or even destructive activities. Peace rarely provides the basis of equitable development, potentially risking a relapse into conflict. As Dr. Willem Noord, an economist and special chair in business and entrepreneurship at Maastricht University, explains, for the right type of entrepreneurship to emerge or be encouraged in post-conflict countries, 6 things are needed. They include the need to understand the contexts that produce conflict, the relationship between institutions and entrepreneurship, the role of minority entrepreneurs, the scope of markets to host certain activities, the essential human and financial requirements, and the extant relationship between government and the private sector. Another complicating dimension is religion and its influence on entrepreneurship. Here, Ostrich notes that Christianity, Islam, Jainism and Sikhism encourage entrepreneurial activities in some countries, while Hinduism and Buddhism are largely indifferent towards entrepreneurialism. I am not suggesting that we allow 1,000 flowers to bloom and assume there'll be no weeds. My contention is that post-conflict reconstruction is complex and needs deeper consideration, particularly among non-economic specialists for whom these concepts might seem alien. Let me now broaden the discussion. While relatively little has been written on the role private business can play in post-conflict reconciliation, more attention has been focused on the relationship between peace and trade. Trade provides an effective vehicle for giving people the opportunity and the incentive to combine in pursuit of a common goal: profit. Rebuilding infrastructure, roads, bridges, health and education services, water and energy supply needs to be accompanied by reformed governance. There is, of course, a genuine risk of sorting things out quickly rather than sorting things out correctly, but the slide back into conflict could be quicker if there are no advantages in preserving peace. In developing a post-conflict reconstruction strategy, and I believe the ADF needs to participate in such a strategy, it is important that support for micro and small-sized enterprises be a priority of any government in post-conflict situations. For Del Castillo, the creation of private sector jobs is essential for effective long-term reintegration, since most countries start from a weak fiscal situation that precludes them from creating public sector jobs which donors are reluctant to finance. Here, Gerson concurs, and I quote, "Conflict settlement requires the injection of optimism and hope born of employment and economic opportunity. Otherwise, fragile peace arrangements can rarely be sustained. And over the long term, only the private sector is capable of growing new enterprises, opening investment opportunities, and providing employment and enduring economic security. Moreover, the private sector can do more than serve as a source of foreign investment and economic growth. Involvement of the private sector in the larger work of formulating strategy for post-war recovery will require innovative thinking, aimed at successful war-to-peace transitions through an integrated approach." End quote. There is general agreement that reconstruction takes considerable time. Tellingly, O'Neill argues that the first 6 years post-conflict are generally marked by weakness in a range of public and semi-public institutions. As strengthening a fragile economic environment involves substantial risk, the emphasis needs to be on creating an adequate economic framework rather than just providing aid, supported by accountability and compliance institutions that will support the private sector, create local jobs and facilitate exports. Improving the business environment must be included in post-conflict transition and in reconciliation efforts. I am proposing a minimum decade-long period of engagement to consolidate the gains of military intervention, to preserve peace and to improve the environment for doing business. Anything short of a decade risks a vulnerable nation relapsing into conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, women and girls represent 70% of the world's 1.3 billion people living in absolute poverty, highlighting a need to overcome traditional barriers to women's economic participation. Significantly, a 2015 report published by Ernst & Young highlights the changing dynamic of global entrepreneurship. The face of entrepreneurship is increasingly young and female. Nevertheless, a majority of start-up firms in developing countries fail within 3 years, with a potential factor being a lack of adequate education and training for entrepreneurs, particularly women entrepreneurs, constraining growth of enterprises. This situation presents a key opportunity for Defence to achieve the objectives of the National Action Plan, Women, Peace and Security, through an initiative to fund business experts to mentor and advise women entrepreneurs. In support of UN Resolution 1325, this train, advise, assist approach to business mentoring would mirror components of Bridge, a political training program developed by the Australian Electoral Commission for New Democracies, and Women-Led Businesses, a successful training program empowering African women. While the private sector should be involved early in the transition, security and political considerations often make such involvement practically impossible. For this program to succeed, logistical and financial support from Defence is required. Providing security for civilian experts is also needed. While there is an evolving acceptance of civilian experts integrated within armed forces, the ADF has sometimes resisted proposals to take on non-military tasks, although they bear directly upon security considerations. Therefore, the challenge of how to institutionalise and formalise the position of civilian experts, particularly those with business expertise within deployed contingents, needs attention. For those yet to be persuaded that these are legitimate activities for Defence, let me mention a few ways in which the ADF can contribute to entrepreneurialism, drawing briefly on 3 case studies. While East Timor suffered physical devastation in the collapse of civil order in 1999, stability was restored and peace predicated on prosperity was pursued by a series of initiatives that created a favourable environment for reconstruction. With a stronger emphasis on pre-mission planning and readiness, the East Timor project was approximately 16 weeks in duration, compared with the World Bank average of 15 months for such activities. According to a World Bank report, the key was local partners and the private sector working together to build technical and managerial capacity to achieve rapid physical reconstruction, to restore service delivery, and to establish sustainable policies and institutions. A lesson learned was the establishment of a trust fund for small enterprise and microfinance development projects, issuing 345 loans, providing business skills and training, and creating 12,000 jobs. Researchers from UNSW, Samil and Chand, show that post-conflict Bougainville has enjoyed a private enterprise capacity that is contributing to the economic reconstruction of the island and in the maintenance of peace. Women have taken a leading entrepreneurial role, but the stability that has been achieved could be imperilled by the impending independence vote, according to an ASPI study. Whatever the outcome of the vote, the peace that has been secured is more likely to be preserved in the context of a broad-based prosperity achieved by a comprehensive range of entrepreneurial interests. A third example is drawn from Afghanistan. In an effort to relieve coalition forces from convoy duties, an innovative approach involving tribal elders and community leaders has led to the forming of an Afghan-owned and operated transportation system to secure long-haul supply distribution, relieving coalition forces from convoy duties. The success of the Iraqi transportation network model is helping the US Army 3rd Sustainment Brigade to prove that the concept of developing partnerships with coalition forces, local communities and influential business leaders is assisting Afghanistan in its transition to self-sustainment. During these missions, approximately 40,000 US soldiers remained off the road. For Warren Crocker, a US Army officer, this initiative holds the promise of connecting communities and villages across the many provinces of Afghanistan, promoting economic development, aiding in a more robust import and export market, entrepreneurship and skills training. The power of entrepreneurship to transform an economy presents a unique opportunity for Defence to challenge the status quo, to develop new businesses, drive job creation and economic growth, and to assist in lifting people out of poverty while sustaining the gains made by military intervention. The rewards for taking a more proactive approach are potentially high. Australia can show that it can do more than place boots on the ground and provide a creative solution to create the conditions for lasting peace. Australia is a prosperous country. This imposes a duty on Australia to play a key part in helping its neighbours to be change agents of their lives in the hope this will enhance prospects for peace and prosperity. Let me leave you with some closing, perhaps even controversial thoughts that I'll be seeking to explore further in the book chapter. Defence has not traditionally interested itself in development, business and commerce. This has led to the silo mentality that arises in post-conflict strategising. Defence almost fears entrepreneurship because it possibly thinks assisting business will lead to claims of corruption, favouritism or entrenching nepotism. But defence is concerned with security, which is undergirded by economic conditions and the need to avoid poverty and economic disadvantage, which is a powerful precondition for conflict. Defence needs people just to specialise in development economics and to lose its prejudice against entrepreneurs. The accumulation of expertise in economic affairs will reward the investment. It should not be left to AusAid or other government or private bodies, because ADF members are offering advice and training and mentorship, and to be seasoned with an understanding of how economies work and how they can develop, especially in SFA missions. Some of the mentoring of military personnel needs to include guidance and modelling of what is acceptable and laudable, such as helping to create positive economic conditions, whereas corruption, nepotism, graft undermine the standing of the military establishment. Defence does not have enough in-house experience and expertise with entrepreneurialism and is not to be feared but encouraged. And entrepreneurialism attracts some debate, but defence should encourage it because it secures the gains of military involvement and preserves peace and undergirds stability. Colleagues, let me pause there to take your comments and contributions in the hope of gaining a holistic perception of the complex tasks ahead. Thank you.
So we're still on about the pig.
Yes. That's right, shooting through the air.
Mark, please.
It was self-serving, grabbing the microphone. I wasn't here to help you guys. Just an observation and then a question, if I can. Thanks, Andrew. The point about military entrepreneurship is a relatively new one, but it's catching on. There's the Defence Entrepreneurs Network kicking off in Australia this year. Brigadier Mick Ryan's the patron of it. It's been run by a bunch of young officers, basically. And I think you'll hear more about that very soon. And they're having some sort of get-together, pardon my ignorance of the nature of it, here in Canberra later in the year, I believe. So more of that will emerge as we move forward.
Tell us what it's called.
Defence Entrepreneurs something, institution, network, club, group. Yell out if anyone else knows anything about it. Network, Defence Entrepreneurs Network.
Dan. Yeah. Anyone part of the network is here today?
DGT sponsoring it, Claire O'Neill at Staff College, and some of her people are behind
she's, just the background of that, Claire followed me as the Fulbright scholar and I asked her to come, but she's a bit busy.
Yeah, we keep them busy out at ACSC. But yeah, so I think that's, the idea of entrepreneurship is good. Onto the naysayer side of things, as someone who's seen defence personnel do this in Somalia, Mozambique, Iraq and Afghanistan, we make really, really crappy economics advisors, town mayors and all that. I mean, the stories of the PRTs in these places are horrific wherever you read. And I guess my question is, why would we take an organisation that's optimised to break other people's stuff and kill them, and or train other people to break other people's stuff and kill them, at the expense of the proliferation of INGOs, DFID, USAID, AusAid, and all these sort of folks who are actually quite good at what they do. So I see a partnership perhaps, but my question to you is what... Well, they were there. Richard can tell you about the people in Basra when we were there. They are there. I sense the opportunity is not so much about, my challenge to you is it's not so much about Defence doing this, but Defence enabling it through those experts.
I think the points you raise is what I'm flagging. Like, this is embryonic in this thing, because I had a chat with Colonel Brad Orchard, and that the response for this particular doctrine, if you like, that is being is a blank sheet of paper right now. So it's an opportune time to put these thoughts together. The Women, Peace and Security Initiative drives that next bit of work for Brad and Colonel Amanda Fielding. So he's doing policy, she's doing operational. So the opportunity to put this together was just too good to miss. But I think what I could see going forward, if you have a look at the way that Bridge program, which is the Australian Electoral Commission designed and delivered for new or troubled democracies, it's about enabling that mentoring to occur. One possibility is that these people are actually sourced or seconded through ACCI or AI Group. And actually then that's defence funding that. One of the things that you'll find difficult, and I've run a small business, you cannot take 3 to 6 months off and still be able to pay your bills. So you would need to be a secondee through that program. And I'm just suggesting, as we evolve this thinking, as to one way that could be done is seconding the business experts, but it's defence also providing that secure environment for them.
So you're agreeing with Mark, it's an enabling function more than a direct doing function, if I can put it in.
I think, yes, because I think that image of you've got the boots on the ground, but then if you saw a different image of, you know, a business person, not saying White Shoe Brigade, but someone that's offering that business mentoring. And the particular emphasis on here is that it's the women entrepreneurs that need that more than any other group. Yep.
Richard, and then we'll go to...
One of the very noticeable things about insurgencies is that they need a lot of cash. And they raise cash generally through entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Two of the most largest entrepreneur groups at the moment are, of course, the Islamic State and Lebanese Hezbollah, both of whom have very extensive entrepreneur networks. So I know you mentioned there were 6 principles to try and make sure that you're encouraging the right kinds of entrepreneurs, but how on the ground do you differentiate between the kinds of entrepreneurs that we want to promote, and I absolutely agree it is fundamental to state building, and how do you avoid actually giving money to the bad guys? Well,
I think if we're operating in that environment of, like, say, a liberal democracy, you've got to have the good with the bad. And I think it was a classic press conference where a US commander was asked a very similar sort of questions. Sorry, are we talking about Kandahar or Chicago? You know, so it just doesn't matter where you are. You cannot avoid perhaps some of that corrupt activity occurring, but it's about the business training, the business development, and then leading to perhaps those market opportunities for importing and exporting. The Taliban are good farmers that just could get into other crops. But I really liked the truckies initiative from that perspective, because there's actually financial incentives for those that are involved in that. If something goes missing, it's on that driver to actually go and find where that stuff has been pinched from and ended up. And through that network of tribal elders and community leaders, word gets back, oh, that was Jono that did that. And so it's a financial incentive in that transportation network initiative as well. So I think you cannot have just good, but I think the bad will eventually be the minor part, no different than what we have here in Canberra as you would in Kandahar.
Is that an intelligence function? I mean, is that a legitimate function for intelligence agency to say, with economic warfare, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys? And have you seen that happen?
I don't think you can tell, because it'd be rare that intelligence penetration is good enough, I think. But I have just seen insurgency sustained by Western cash.
Yes, well,
in the same way in the 1950s, the Communist Party of America was sustained by the CIA, it was the FBI paying dues for all their agents who had penetrated the Communist Party.
So if we brought in Bob's pig story from this morning, and your cash example, What's stopping a commander being allowed to hand out a little bit of cash to support a village purchasing some goats and cattle that actually help them? You know, we do it for other reasons. Cash is handed out for other purposes. What's stopping us from actually doing that, taking a different approach and saying, here's a little bit of this to help you get along? Starting that entrepreneurial journey that way.
And final question.
Not without invoices, of course, because, you know, and 3 quotes.
I guess this is a combination of both an offer and a question. Centre for Army Lessons, once again, most people have no idea just how much information we have at our disposal. So firstly, let me offer to you that the ABCA program has done a fair bit of work on money as a weapon system. Not to imply that we're going to shoot people with dollar bills or anything, but point is, though, that those commander seed funds, well, that's already been put out in the field before, no doubt you've read about that. There's actually been some documentation done on when it is and isn't appropriate, taking Mark's point down the front, because obviously the security situation may not be permissive for anyone else to do it. So this leads me on to the question also of maybe this is something we can consider for our reserves in the future, because this is something we have most definitely successfully used reservists for in the past, to bring their innate experience that we don't even recognise half the time to the
I think that's a terrific idea if you can get them past the computer test as part of recruiting, right? I've buggered it up twice. I cannot do that reserves recruitment test, right? Because I sat there too long, rather than actually just getting through the question. So you're going to have to adapt your recruiting process and making sure that, you know, the skills actually fit the remit of that person. Because there are chaplains that actually didn't get into reserves because they didn't pass that computer test. So you'll have to amend the recruitment process from that end, but I think that's an excellent use of that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the US do it very well. Side entry. Yes. They do it very well.
One of the key places with Commander C funds are quite successful.
Yes. No, thank you. Excellent suggestion.
We'll need to finish there. Would you please thank Andrew for his contribution?